Yeah, this hearing should not have been political, and most of it was not, I would say, today, fortunately. But the fact that it is simply is further evidence this conversation is completely necessary to take place. I can say that I've invested in all sides of the issues around the pandemic, starting in 2020, being on the Intelligence Committee, and also researching what other countries were doing, how are we going to try and treat people, how are we going to try and save lives, right? Learned a lot. As representatives, we're the conduit to asking their questions. It's not easy for them to just call you and get an answer. Although I thank you for taking my call early on, Dr. Marks, during the pandemic. Look, perception is reality. I mentioned that at the beginning. And that's what we have to face. And words matter, because when you say reduce, it's different than saying prevent. And that happened too often. Not necessarily from your voice, but it happened, and that's what America heard. I think it became clear today about the VAERS system. It's not the be-all, end-all. It's the initial recycling can, if you will, and then you decide what actually goes further. But we didn't say that, but it's the only one America saw. It's the only thing that was out there for the public. So what do we expect? And I think that matters. You know, we see things on some of these natural items in the drugstore. It'll say on there, not approved by the FDA as a legitimate treatment, but it's okay to take, but it isn't necessarily going to meet all its claims necessarily. We put that out there. That's an honesty. That's an honest approach to what America is out there. Look, I think there's never been a question that vaccines save lives by anyone. Hey, I'm from Cincinnati. Do you know how much pride in Cincinnati we take because it's the home of Albert Sabin and the polio vaccine? You know, it's huge. That's in our DNA in Cincinnati. We grow up knowing that. We take pride in it. But we can't leave behind those that have been injured simply because they don't necessarily fit a narrative regarding the vaccine safety. We got to take all that into consideration. We heard today patients and parents should have a conversation with their personal health care provider to assess the vaccine, whether it's appropriate for their particular position, condition, whatever. You know, Dr. Marks, I heard you today very caringly, I feel, say you have regret about those under 5 years old that may have died from COVID. But I talk to pediatricians, and some say, yeah, I think they should be vaccinated if they've got A, B, C, D, or E. And I think that's important. One size doesn't fit all in medicine. It never has and never will. That goes back to talking to your doctor, and that goes back to revealing all the data about those that may have died. These are children that maybe would have died if they got the common cold. I don't know. But those are things you have to take into consideration. I've learned a lot about COVID-19. I think if we want to assess somebody's vulnerability, maybe we should check their furin levels, and I won't go into the science of that maybe you all understand, because that's what it takes to cleave the furin cleavage site, which makes it more infectious to humans. That's another story. But this committee, I think we did a good job today if we really look at the facts that were revealed and discussed openly about where our pitfalls are. And I'm not just blaming the government, because it's politicians too. It's politicians that drove a lot of distrust in what was coming out of public health. Look, we just go back to the beginning. President Trump says we need to restrict travel. Dr. Fauci told us that he recommended that we restrict travel. What happened to President Trump when he said that? He's a racist, and politicians say, oh no, there's nothing to worry about here. That's a racist comment, come to Chinatown. Yeah, let's create a super spreader. That's a problem. That's a problem on our side. And that's why I go and say we need to hear from the doctors treating COVID patients more than anyone else. Again, lives have been saved, but we can't ignore the maladies. We can't ignore certain things. I mentioned before, Dr. Marks, you're advocating on Operation Warp Speed. We were with you all the way. But you have a politician saying that, in essence, Dr. Marks, if it's your vaccine, she's not taking it. That doesn't help us. That creates vaccine hesitancy. When a politician stands up and says, if you take this, you're not going to the ICU and you're not going to die. Yet some were going to the ICU and some were dying. That's a fact. And there may have been a lot of other reasons for it. China comes out and says, we've got this under control. The WHO parrots it. Dr. Lane goes to China. They got it all under control. That's the advice given to politicians. So, of course there's distrust, but that came from China themselves. They didn't have it under control, yet that's what they were telling everybody. That leads to distrust. So we must trust but verify, especially when we're taking advice from an adversary. Look, the risks have to be put out. No drug can run a commercial, regardless of what you think of commercials on drugs. They can't run it without listing all the risks. Doctors have to sit, or it's malpractice if they don't go over the risks. We weren't doing that. And we issued a mandate, said you've got to get it or you lose your job. They go to the drugstore and get it and get their card. Did they have a sit down? I'm glad to hear you all agree today, at least I think you do, that it requires the best practices to have a conversation with your doctor about your personal health. And the better data the doctor has, the better we can treat patients. That's what we're after. Saving lives, treating patients better. I mentioned before about, there's a difference between saying effectiveness data is different than just saying it's effective. There's data that might say it's not 100% effective, right? And we know that. But this is what the public hears. And so they get confused because they know, well, I know some people had an adverse reaction. Why are we saying it's safe? It's not 100% safe. So you may have done work completely 100% right. But if it's not messaged clearly or accurately down the line, it's a problem. I often ask, where's our Surgeon General to be talking about this? When I grew up, it was C. Everett Koop, and people trusted it. The reason I said we need to hear from doctors treating COVID patients, I'm reminded of General Schwarzkopf during the Gulf War. Every night America tuned in to hear what the general had to say about the war, not what a politician had to say about the war. I think that makes a huge difference. We recognize today, gratefully, that we are telling the American people, when we recognize myocarditis as a problem, we did something about it. That's important. That builds public trust. But if it's perceived that we're just ignoring it and mandating this anyway, it's a problem. I question why we quit talking about convalescent plasma as a form of treatment, especially when we knew that the vaccine we had did not prevent you from getting COVID. You just got less sick. Why were we not focusing more on treatments like that were very effective? At least in Cincinnati, I saw that. Why did we ignore natural immunity? I was told I needed a booster to go to Germany. I had been vaccinated, both doses of Pfizer. I got COVID several months later, and the only reason I knew is because I couldn't smell garlic salt. That's the only way I knew. And when I got my antibodies checked, and I wanted to do T cells as well, when I got my antibodies checked, where I'm being told I need a booster, strong number was 40, my number was 821, and I got the lab report to show it. Now, you have a conversation with your doctor about that. Why did we put this aside? And that's what America understood. Why are we not talking about the benefits of natural immunity? Why are we not saying, if you have natural immunity, you are less likely to get another round of COVID? Why were we not looking at that kind of data to see? Those are things we should have done. Actually, I wanted to do that through the military, and Secretary Austin never responded. As a matter of fact, it was 22 physicians that signed that letter to the Secretary of Defense, and he never responded. Never answered our question, even after several attempts. So we have some things that, we got people here that want to make a difference, especially going forward. But we can't ignore these hiccups. We can't ignore these questions that the American people have. If I only sat here in Washington, I can't have this discussion with you the way I'm having it. But it's you go home and you're the conduit to the government. And you know what? If we aren't honest, if we can't be trusted, we don't get elected. But they see people in Washington never leave amongst the unelected. Just understand that. That's why it's important we have this conversation. That's why it's important that we do better going forward. And I thank you all for your time today. I appreciate the work that you do. We want to be helpful to make it even better in the future.